I'm Margaret, 28 female. I live alone in a small but meticulously organized apartment, the kind where every book has its place and the spice rack is alphabetized. By profession, I'm an archivist for the city's historical society, a job that suits my quiet nature perfectly. I spend my days preserving the past, finding solace in the concrete, verifiable truth of old documents and photographs. My life is built on order and facts, a stark contrast to the subtle, unspoken chaos of my family. For years, I believed that the dynamic was simple. My parents, Catherine and David, were loving but practical. My younger brother, Daniel, was the charming, free-spirited golden child, and I was the responsible, self-sufficient older sister. But a single sentence, spoken over the steam of Christmas gravy, would prove that the history I thought I knew was the most elaborate fiction of all. It was the moment I learned that my entire financial foundation was a lie, and the people I trusted most had been quietly building their dreams on top of my stolen future. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My role in the family had been cemented since childhood. I was the easy one. While my brother Daniel was a whirlwind of scraped knees, forgotten homework, and artistic passions that changed with the seasons, I was the one who got good grades, never missed a curfew, and started a savings account with my first part-time job at 16. My parents praised my independence, often with a tired sigh that implied what a relief it was compared to Daniel. "Thank goodness for you, Margaret," my mother would say after paying for another one of Daniel's broken instruments or failed ventures. "You've always had such a good head on your shoulders." I took it as a compliment, a badge of honor. I didn't realize it was a justification. My self-sufficiency wasn't just appreciated, it was expected. It was necessary. It freed up their resources, emotional, mental, and as I would soon learn, financial, to be poured into my brother. I floated my own way through college, working 2 jobs to supplement my scholarships, meticulously budgeting to avoid student loans. I was proud of graduating debt-free, a feat I thought was entirely my own. When Daniel went to university a few years later, my parents took out loans to ensure he could focus on his studies without the burden of a job. When I asked about it, my father, the accountant, simply said, "Things are a bit easier for us now, honey. We're in a better position." I accepted it. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. I thought they were being fair in their own way. I was the one who was already established, already stable. It made a certain kind of sense. The little pangs of jealousy I felt were quickly suppressed by my own ingrained sense of responsibility. I was fine. I didn't need their help. That was my identity. The lead up to that final Christmas was like any other. I was tasked with coordinating who would bring what, making sure my grandmother, Eleanor, had a ride, and gently reminding Daniel to please buy a real gift for Grandma instead of gifting her a song he wrote on the spot. My mother, Catherine, a retired teacher, orchestrated the entire event with a practiced air of martyrdom, sighing about the work while secretly loving the control. My father, David, remained a quiet presence in the background, a man whose silence I had always mistaken for calm deliberation. Daniel, at 24, had recently graduated and was working a retail job he complained about endlessly, all while talking about his real future as a music producer. That year, he'd been especially excited, dropping hints about a big purchase he'd made that was going to change everything for his career. I assumed he'd bought some new software or a keyboard. On Christmas morning, he revealed it, a brand new, gleaming dark blue sedan. It was a reliable, sensible car, far more sensible than anything I'd ever known Daniel to want. We all gathered in the driveway to admire it. "Wow, Danny," I said, genuinely impressed. "How did you manage this?" He just grinned. "Just some smart saving," he said with a shrug, a line so uncharacteristic it was almost comical. My parents beamed. "Our son," my father said, clapping him on the back. "He's learning to be responsible." There was a strange, charged energy in the air, a collective pride that felt slightly forced, but I dismissed it as typical family holiday weirdness. I was happy for him, or at least I told myself I was. Deep down, a familiar question pricked at me. How? How could he afford this on a retail salary while I was still driving my 15-year-old hatchback and carefully portioning my grocery budget? I pushed the thought away. It was Christmas. It wasn't the time for resentment. It was a day for family, for tradition, for pretending everything was perfectly fine. The dinner table was a picture of forced holiday cheer. My mother's fine china, used only twice a year, sat beneath a perfectly roasted turkey. My father was at the head of the table, carving the bird with practiced precision. Daniel was loudly recounting a story about a difficult customer, embellishing it for comedic effect. I was sitting next to my grandmother, Eleanor, ensuring her wine glass was never empty. She was quieter than usual, her gaze drifting between my parents and my brother with an unreadable expression. At 80, Grandma Eleanor didn't bother with social niceties anymore. She was a woman of sharp intelligence and even sharper opinions, something my mother found endlessly frustrating. "Mother, do you need more potatoes?" Catherine would ask, her voice tight. "I'll take them when I'm ready, Catherine," Eleanor would reply, not unkindly, but with a firmness that ended the conversation. There was a tension coiling in the air, but it was a familiar one, the low-grade hum of family dysfunction that we'd all learned to ignore. We were halfway through the meal when my mother lifted her glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, her smile a little too bright. "To Daniel, we are so proud of the man you're becoming. Your father and I are just thrilled about your new car and the new chapter it represents." Everyone raised their glasses. I clinked mine against Daniel S., offering a genuine smile. "It's a really great car, Dan," he puffed up with pride. "Thanks, Mags, it's a game changer. No more taking the bus to open mic nights." That's when my grandmother spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chatter with absolute clarity. She was looking at my parents, a small, knowing smile on her face. "Well, I hope he loves the car you bought him with the money I gave," she said, her tone light and conversational. I was so happy to contribute to his first big purchase. Silence. It wasn't just a lull in conversation, it was a physical entity, a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the entire room. My father's carving knife froze mid-slice over the turkey. My mother's smile collapsed, her face paling. Daniel stared down at his plate, his ears turning a bright, telltale red. I felt my own fork clatter against my plate. Every head turned slowly, first to my grandmother, then to my parents, and finally to me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of her words. The money I gave. What money? Grandma had always been generous with her birthday and Christmas checks, but never anything that could fund a down payment on a new car. I turned to my grandmother, my voice feeling strangely distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "What money, Grandma?" The question hung in the air, stark and terrifying. My mother shot Eleanor a look of pure fury, a silent, desperate plea for her to stop. But Grandma just looked at me, her expression softening with something that looked like pity. "The money from your grandfather's inheritance, dear," she said gently. "The $50,000 I gave your parents to hold for you until you were settled. I told them to give it to you when you bought your first house or made a similar big investment. I thought a car for Daniel was an odd choice, but I assumed you'd both agreed." $50,000. The number echoed in the cavernous silence of my mind. It was an impossible sum, a life-altering amount of money that I had never known existed. My gaze snapped to my parents. My mother wouldn't look at me, her eyes fixed on a small gravy stain on the tablecloth. My father had put the knife down, his hands resting on the table as if to brace himself. His face was a mask of guilt. "Mom, Dad," I whispered, my voice trembled. "What is she talking about?" My mother finally looked up, her expression a frantic, flustered mess. "Margaret, honey, It's complicated. Your grandmother is confused. Her memory isn't what it used to be." It was a desperate, pathetic lie, and everyone knew it. Eleanor scoffed, a sharp, indignant sound. "Confused? Catherine, I have the bank transfer records. I sent the money to your joint account 7 years ago, the week after Margaret's 21st birthday, just as your father and I planned." 7 years. For 7 years, they had been sitting on a fortune that was meant for me. A fortune they had just used to buy my brother a car. The room started to feel small, the air thick and unbreathable. I looked at Daniel, who was still refusing to meet my eyes. The pieces began to click into place with sickening speed. His smart saving. My parents' sudden ability to pay for his college. Their constant praise of my independence, my self-sufficiency. It wasn't praise. It was management. They were managing me, keeping me in the dark, so they could use what was mine to pave an easier road for him. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that I couldn't even form a coherent thought. Al. All I could feel was a cold, spreading numbness. I slowly pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The car wasn't the only thing, was it? I asked, the question aimed at the ceiling, at the silent, complicit air in the room. No one answered, and in their silence I had my answer. The ride home with my grandmother was silent. The festive lights of the neighborhood blurred past the car window, mocking the cold, hard knot of betrayal tightening in my chest. I drove on autopilot, my mind a chaotic storm of numbers, lies, and my parents' guilty faces. $50,000. It was a sum so large it felt unreal. It could have been a down payment on a condo, the end of my student debt worries, a safety net that would have allowed me to take risks, to breathe easier. Instead, it had been a secret slush fund for my brother. When we pulled into her driveway, Alina didn't move to get out of the car. She simply turned to me, her wrinkled face etched with a deep sadness. "I am so sorry, Margaret," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "I truly thought you knew. When your mother mentioned Daniel's new car, she said it was a family effort. I thought that meant you had generously agreed to help him. It never occurred to me they would keep it from you entirely." I finally looked at her, the numbness beginning to recede, replaced by a surge of raw, hot anger. "Why did you give it to them? Why not directly to me?" It was an unfair question, born of pain, but I couldn't stop it from tumbling out. Alina didn't flinch. "Your grandfather and I set up funds for both you and Daniel. The terms were that the money was to be transferred to your parents' care on your 21st birthdays, for them to manage until you were ready for a major life purchase. We trusted them. David is an accountant, for heaven's sake. We thought he would be the perfect steward of the money. We thought they loved you both equally." Her words were meant to be comforting, but the phrase, "loved you both equally," was like a knife twist. Their actions had proven that to be the most profound lie of all. We went inside, and Alina made us tea, her hands moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. She disappeared into her study for a few minutes and returned with a thin, beige folder. She slid it across the polished surface of her kitchen table. My name was written on the tab in her elegant, looping cursive. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, legal documents, and a letter. The letter was from my grandfather, dated just before he passed away 10 years ago. In it, he wrote about his hopes for my future, his pride in my studious nature, and his wish that this money would give me a secure start in life. Reading his words, feeling the love and care embedded in each sentence, broke something inside me. A sob escaped my lips, a ragged, ugly sound. This wasn't just about money. It was about his legacy, his love for me, which my parents had intercepted and corrupted. The bank statement was irrefutable. It showed a wire transfer of exactly $50,000 from Alina's account to my parents' joint savings account, dated 7 years prior. The memo line read, "For Margaret inheritance." Alina tapped a finger on the document. There was a similar fund for Daniel. His was transferred to them on his 21st birthday, 3 years ago. I imagine his is gone as well. I stared at her. "They got $50,000 for him, too?" She nodded grimly. "Yes, $100,000 in total, held in trust, or so I thought." The full scope of the deception was beginning to dawn on me, and it was staggering. I started doing the math in my head, my archivist brain kicking into gear, seeking order in the chaos. Daniel's last 2 years of university, the ones my parents said they'd found a way to pay for. His rent for the downtown apartment he couldn't possibly afford on his own. The expensive music equipment that would appear in his room. It wasn't just the car. The car was just the latest, most blatant withdrawal from the Bank of Margaret. They had been systematically draining my inheritance for years to fund my brother's life, all while I was working 2 jobs, eating instant noodles, and feeling proud of my own manufactured independence. The praise, the compliments on my responsibility, it was all a lie designed to keep me from asking questions. They didn't want me to be responsible. They needed me to be, so I wouldn't be a financial burden. I wouldn't need what was rightfully mine. "What about Daniel's fund?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "What did they use that for?" Alina sighed, taking a sip of her tea. "I can't say for sure, but I have my suspicions. David mentioned making some smart investments a few years ago. He was very vague. I suspect he may have used Daniel's money, and perhaps some of yours, in the stock market. And from the way he's been talking about the economy lately, I doubt those investments did well. The betrayal deepened. It wasn't just about funding Daniel's lifestyle, it was about recklessness. My father, the cautious accountant, had gambled with our futures. I felt a wave of nausea. My grandmother watched me, her eyes sharp and assessing. What they did is more than just morally wrong, Margaret. It's legally questionable. That money was given with clear intent. They were meant to be custodians, not beneficiaries. She pushed a small card across the table. It held the name and number of a lawyer. He handled our estate. He knows the terms of the trust better than anyone. It might be time to have a conversation with him. I looked down at the card, then back at the folder containing the proof of my parents' deceit. The anger was now hardening into something else, something cold and clear. Resolve. My parents had built a world for me based on a lie. They had curated my personality, celebrated my struggles because they profited from them, and stolen my security. They had treated me like a line item on a balance sheet they needed to zero out. For years, I had played my part in the family drama, the responsible daughter, the self-sufficient sister. Now it was time for a new role. The archivist in me took over. An archivist's job is to uncover the truth, preserve the record, and ensure that history is not erased. My family had tried to erase my history, my inheritance, my grandfather's legacy. I decided then and there, sitting in my grandmother's quiet kitchen, that I would uncover every single lie. I would create a new record, one based not on their fiction, but on cold, hard facts. And then I would present it to them. The performance was over. The days following Christmas were a blur of quiet, methodical fury. I called my parents once. My mother answered, her voice a cocktail of false cheer and desperation. "Margaret, we were so worried. Your grandmother's outburst, it was so unlike her. She had us all so confused." I didn't engage. I didn't argue. "I need copies of my birth certificate and my social security card for a new work verification process," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. It was a lie, but a plausible one. There was a pause. "Of course, dear, I have them in the filing cabinet in the office. I can mail them to you. I'll be there tomorrow at 10 to pick them up," I stated, not asking. "I don't want you to go to the trouble of mailing them." I could hear the panic in her voice as she tried to regain control. "Oh, honey, the house is a mess. Can't I just—" 10 a.m., I repeated and hung up. I needed to get into that house. My father, the meticulous accountant, kept everything. Every bill, every statement, every tax return for the past 30 years was filed away in his home office. That office, which I was never allowed to enter as a child, was now my primary target. My grandmother had given me the ammunition. Now I had to find the rest of the arsenal. When I arrived the next morning, my father's car was gone, a small blessing. My mother greeted me at the door, her face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Are you feeling better?" she asked, reaching out to touch my arm. I stepped back just enough for her hand to drop. "Just here for the documents," I said. She led me to the office, chattering nervously about the weather, about holiday sales, about anything other than the monumental secret that now lay exposed between us. She opened a filing cabinet, retrieved a small folder, and handed it to me. "Here you are." I took it, but I didn't move. I glanced around the office, at the locked drawers of the main desk and the tall, metal cabinet in the corner. "You know," I said, my voice casual, "I was thinking about my old college applications. I wanted to see the essays I wrote. Do you remember where you filed those?" It was a gamble, a shot in the dark. My mother frowned, trying to place the memory. "Oh, goodness, maybe in the education file, let me see." She turned back to the cabinet she'd just been in. As she shuffled through folders, my eyes darted to the wastebasket next to the desk. On top of a pile of shredded paper was a crumpled bank statement. My heart hammered against my ribs. While her back was turned, I leaned down, scooped it out, and shoved it into my large purse. "You know what, don't worry about it," I said quickly. "It's not important, I have to get going." Her relief was palpable. She walked me to the door, still trying to smooth things over. "We should talk, Margaret, when things have calmed down." I just looked at her. "There's nothing to talk about," I said and left. Back in my car, I pulled out the crumpled statement. It was from a brokerage firm I didn't recognize. It wasn't my parents' joint account, this one was in my father's name only. And the numbers made my blood run cold. The portfolio was down nearly 40%. There were records of large deposits made over the last few years, deposits that corresponded sickeningly well with the timeline of my brother's expenses and the dates the inheritance money was available. My father hadn't just used the money, he'd gambled it away. He had taken my grandfather's gift, my security, and thrown it into a volatile market, chasing a high return and losing catastrophically. The lie was so much bigger than just spoiling my brother. This was about my father's pride, his ego. He wasn't just an accountant. He was a failed investor who had used his own children's inheritance as play money. The next step was the lawyer my grandmother had recommended, Mr. Hemlock. He was a kind, elderly man with sharp eyes who remembered my grandfather well. I sat in his stuffy, book-lined office and laid out the story, pushing the folder Aliner had given me across his desk. He listened patiently, his expression growing more grave with each detail. When I finished, he examined the documents carefully. "Your grandmother is correct," he said finally. "The money was transferred to your parents in a custodial capacity. It was not a gift to them. They had a fiduciary duty to manage it in your best interest. Using it for your brother's expenses or for your father's personal investments is a clear and flagrant breach of that duty." He explained the legal jargon in simple terms. My parents were, for all intents and purposes, trustees. They had stolen from the trust. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You have several options," he explained. "We can send them a letter demanding a full accounting of the funds and immediate repayment. If they refuse, you can take them to civil court to recover the money. Given the clear paper trail, you would almost certainly win. A lawsuit. The thought was terrifying, suing my own parents. But what other choice did I have? They had left me with nothing." He continued, "The brokerage account is another matter. That is evidence of misappropriation. If we can prove he used your funds without permission for his own high-risk investments, it strengthens your case significantly." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the web of lies they had spun around me. My entire life had been recontextualized. Every time they'd said, "We can't afford it for something I needed," it was a lie. Every time they praised my frugality, it was a lie. Every time they'd made me feel guilty for wanting something, knowing that my brother was getting everything, it was all part of a massive, years-long campaign of deception. The saddest part was how easy it had been for them. They had counted on my trust. They had weaponized my love for them against me. And Daniel, my brother, was he an innocent beneficiary or a willing accomplice? The way he had stared at his plate at Christmas dinner told me everything I needed to know. He knew. He had known all along that his easy life was being paid for by my stolen future. They weren't just a family, they were co-conspirators. The betrayal wasn't a single act, but 1,000 tiny cuts over 7 long years. As the sun rose, a cold, hard certainty settled over me. Mr. Hemlock had talked about demanding repayment, but that wasn't enough. A simple check wouldn't fix the years of manipulation. It wouldn't restore my grandfather's legacy. They hadn't just stolen money, they had stolen my trust, my history, my sense of self. They deserved to feel a fraction of the public humiliation and private devastation that I was feeling. A lawsuit would be messy and public, and that was exactly what they deserved. The decision to proceed with legal action felt like stepping off a cliff. The moment Mr. Hemlock sent the official letter of demand to my parents' address, I knew there was no going back. The letter was formal and brutal, outlining their breach of fiduciary duty and demanding a full accounting of the $50,000, plus interest and immediate repayment. It was a declaration of war. For 3 days, my phone was silent. Then, the siege began. My mother called first, leaving a string of tearful, hysterical voicemails. "Margaret, how could you do this to us, to your own family? After everything we've done for you, we are horrified. This is a private matter, not something for lawyers." Next came my father. His message was cold and threatening. "You need to call this off, Margaret. You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to destroy this family and you will regret it. This is a gross misunderstanding." The one person who didn't call was Daniel. His silence was, in its own way, the most damning response of all. He was hiding behind our parents, just as he always had. I didn't answer any of their calls. I let everyone go to voicemail. Listening to their alternating waves of manufactured outrage and veiled threats only strengthened my resolve. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. They saw me not as a wounded daughter, but as a problem to be managed. Their goal was to intimidate me back into my box, to make me feel guilty and unreasonable so they could sweep their crimes back under the rug. But the woman who would have buckled under that pressure was gone, replaced by someone they didn't recognize. With the legal process moving at a glacial pace, I focused on what I could control, myself. The betrayal had shattered my sense of identity, and I needed to build a new one from the ground up, one that wasn't defined by their lies. My first act of rebellion was small but significant. I had always wanted to take a course in rare book restoration, a specialized field within my profession, but I'd always told myself I couldn't afford the tuition or the time off. It was an indulgence, a luxury. Now I saw that thinking for what it was, a cage my parents had helped build. I marched into my boss's office at the Historical Society, laid out a proposal for how the course would benefit our collection, and asked for professional development funding. I was terrified, my voice shaking, but I did it. To my astonishment, he agreed immediately. "I was wondering when you'd ask, Margaret," he said with a smile. "You're one of our best. It's a worthy investment." That simple validation felt like a lifeline. It was a reminder that my worth wasn't determined by my family. I had value on my own terms. The next step was harder. I needed to create physical and emotional distance. My apartment, which I had once loved for its cozy solitude, now felt haunted by the shadow of their deception. Every corner held a memory of a phone call where I'd told them I was doing just fine, not knowing I was enabling their theft. I started looking for a new place, a small studio in a neighborhood closer to work. The process of packing up my life was a form of therapy. I went through old photo albums, looking at the smiling faces of my parents and brother with new, cynical eyes. I saw the forced family portraits, the birthday parties where Daniel's gifts were always more extravagant, the vacations I couldn't make because of work while they took him to exotic places. It was all there, a clear pattern of inequity I had been blind to. I didn't throw the photos away. As an archivist, I couldn't bring myself to destroy the record, no matter how painful. Instead, I packed them into a box, labeled it Family Archives Pre-Discovery, and stored it in the back of a closet. I was closing a chapter. During this time, my grandmother Alina was my rock. We spoke every few days. She never told me what to do, but she listened. She provided the unwavering support my parents should have given me. She told me stories about my grandfather, reinforcing the man of integrity he was, reminding me that the legacy he'd left was one of love, not deceit. "He would be so proud of your strength, Margaret," she told me during one call. "He always said you had a steel spine." It was a compliment that meant more to me than a lifetime of my parents' hollow praise. As my new life began to take shape, a new apartment, a challenging new course, a burgeoning sense of self-worth, Mr. Hemlock called with an update. My parents had responded to his letter, not with an offer of repayment, but with a letter from their own lawyer. They denied any wrongdoing. They claimed the money from Alina was a gift to the family, to be used at their discretion for the benefit of all. They painted me as a greedy, ungrateful daughter who was trying to extort them. The denial was so audacious, so completely divorced from reality that I actually laughed. It was the final confirmation I needed. There was no misunderstanding. This was who they were. They would lie, manipulate, and gaslight until the very end. "So, we proceed to court," I said to Mr. Hemlock, my voice steady. "Yes," he confirmed. "We'll file the suit next week. It will become a matter of public record." I thought of my mother, the retired teacher so concerned with her community reputation. I thought of my father, the accountant whose entire career was built on an image of trustworthiness. A public lawsuit would be their worst nightmare. A quiet, private settlement was what they wanted. It was the one thing I was no longer willing to give them. My new path wasn't just about recovering what was mine. It was about forcing them into the light. The truth, like an old document, deserved to be preserved and seen. And I would be the one to display it for all the world to see. Filing the lawsuit was like pulling the pin on a grenade. The moment it became public record, the comfortable, respectable facade my parents had built for decades began to crack. My father's accounting firm got wind of it. While the case was civil, not criminal, the mere accusation of misappropriating funds from a family member was a stain on his professional reputation. Clients in a small town talk, and the idea that their meticulous, trustworthy accountant might be anything but was poison. My mother, who prided herself on her standing in the retired teacher's social circle, and her volunteer work, suddenly found herself on the receiving end of hushed whispers and pitying looks. The narrative they had tried to spin, of a greedy, difficult daughter, wasn't holding up against the stark, legal reality of a lawsuit. Their carefully curated world was crumbling, and it was a direct result of their own actions. They had underestimated me. They still saw me as the quiet, compliant child who would eventually back down. They had no idea that the archivist in me had spent the last few months doing what I do best, digging. With the help of Mr. Hemlock, we subpoenaed years of their financial records. What we found was even worse than I had imagined. My father hadn't just made one or two bad investments. He had been consistently channeling money from their savings, money that was a blend of my inheritance, Daniel's, and their own funds, into high-risk, speculative tech stocks. It was a pattern of reckless gambling. He was chasing a get-rich-quick fantasy, and he was using our futures as collateral. The records showed that every time Daniel needed something, tuition, rent, the down payment for the car, my father would sell off a portion of whatever investment hadn't yet collapsed, creating a chaotic shell game of moving money around to cover his tracks and fund my brother's life. It was a desperate, unsustainable scheme, and the market downturn had exposed it all. They weren't just thieves, they were financially drowning. This discovery changed my strategy. Simply winning the lawsuit and getting a judgment against them wasn't enough. A judgment was just a piece of paper if they had no assets to pay it with. They had mortgaged their house to the hilt to cover losses, and their savings were depleted. The only significant asset they had left was the house itself, the home I grew up in. An idea began to form, cold and clinical. It wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about a different kind of justice. A symbolic justice. I instructed Mr. Hemlock to make them an offer, a settlement proposal that would avoid a messy public trial. On the surface, it would look like I was being merciful. The terms were simple. First, they had to sign a legally binding confession, a document outlining in excruciating detail how they received the inheritance, how they concealed it from me, and how they misappropriated it for Daniel's expenses and my father's failed investments. The document would be drafted by my lawyer and would be irrefutable. Second, since they had no liquid cash to repay the $50,000, they would sign over the deed to the family home to me. The house was worth far more than what they owed me, but I would assume the remaining mortgage. They would be allowed to live in the house, but as my tenants. They would pay me monthly rent at a fair market rate until the original debt of $50,000, plus interest and my legal fees, was paid in full. After that, I would sell the house and give them whatever equity was left. It was a perfectly crafted cage. It would give them what they desperately wanted, to avoid a public trial and stay in their home, preserving the illusion of their perfect life for their friends and neighbors. But they would lose the one thing they truly valued: control. They would be living in my house, paying me every month, a constant, tangible reminder of their betrayal. My father, the proud head of the household, would have to write a rent check to the daughter he stole from. My mother, who lorded her home over everyone, would become a mere tenant. And the confession, that was my insurance. If they ever missed a payment, if they ever spoke a word against me, if they ever tried to rewrite history again, I would release that document. It was a checkmate. Mr. Hemlock presented the offer to their lawyer. As expected, their initial reaction was explosive outrage. Their lawyer called it draconian and unconscionable. But they were trapped. We had them cornered with their own financial records. A trial would not only expose them publicly, but would likely result in a judgment that would force the sale of the house anyway, leaving them with nothing. My offer was, in a twisted way, their only lifeline. It was a chance to keep up appearances, something I knew my mother would value above all else. The negotiations took weeks. They fought over every clause. They tried to remove the confession. They tried to argue the rent amount. But on every point, I held firm. I was not negotiating, I was dictating terms. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was the bank, the landlord, and the arbiter of their future. Finally, cornered and out of options, they agreed. A date was set for the signing. I suggested we do it at my new apartment, but my mother, in a final, pathetic grasp for control, insisted on a neutral location. A family dinner, she suggested, her voice brittle over the phone, to put all this behind us. I knew it was a ploy, a last-ditch effort. To pull me back into the old dynamic, to appeal to my sense of family and guilt. A final performance, and I decided to accept her invitation. The stage would be of her choosing, but the play would be mine. I agreed to have the signing at their house, my future house, on a Saturday evening. My mother insisted on cooking a reconciliation dinner. The guest list was small and deliberate. Me, my parents, my brother Daniel, and, at my insistence, my grandmother Alina. I also had one more guest they weren't expecting, Mr. Hemlock, who would arrive after dinner to officiate the signing of the documents. The atmosphere when I arrived was thick with a suffocating, unspoken tension. My mother was flitting around the kitchen, her movements jerky and anxious. My father sat in his armchair in the living room, staring at the television without seeing it. Daniel, for his part, looked miserable. He was paler and thinner than he had been at Christmas, and he couldn't look me in the eye. He mumbled a hello and then retreated to the kitchen to help Mom. Alina arrived shortly after me, a beacon of calm strength in a sea of anxiety. She greeted Catherine and David with a cool nod and then came to sit with me, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. Dinner was an excruciating affair. My mother tried to fill the silence with painfully mundane small talk. "The weather has been so lovely for this time of year, hasn't it?" she'd say to the room at large. No one would answer. The clinking of cutlery was deafening. I ate slowly, deliberately. I wasn't there to reconcile. I was there to close a transaction. Finally, after a dessert that no one touched, I cleared my throat. "It's time," I said, my voice calm and clear. My mother started to protest. "Margaret, can't we just have one pleasant evening?" "We are long past pleasant evenings, Mom," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "This is a business meeting now." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. It was Mr. Hemlock, carrying a leather briefcase. I let him in and introduced him to the family, who looked at him as if he were the Grim Reaper. "Good evening," he said pleasantly, setting his briefcase on the dining room table. "I have the settlement documents here for your review and signature." He laid out the papers with practiced efficiency: the confession, the deed transfer, the rental agreement. My father stared at the confession, his face turning a blotchy red. It was a 2-page document that detailed their actions in stark, unapologetic language. It used words like misappropriation, breach of trust, and concealment. My mother began to cry silently, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, but it was Daniel who finally broke. "Mags, don't do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "It was a mistake. We know that, but this is too much." I turned to him, and for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of something other than cold resolve. It was a flicker of the old, protective instinct of an older sister, but it died as quickly as it came. "A mistake, Daniel?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. A mistake is buying the wrong brand of milk. Systematically draining your sister's inheritance for 7 years to fund your lifestyle, all while knowing she was struggling, is not a mistake. It is a calculated series of choices. Did you ever, even once, ask them where the money for your rent, your tuition, your brand new car was coming from?" He flinched, looking down at his hands. I thought they were just helping me out." "You thought they were helping you out with money they didn't have, while I was working 2 jobs to get through college debt-free? Did that not seem strange to you? Or did you just prefer not to ask the question because you liked the answer you were getting?" He had no response. His silence was his confession. I turned my attention back to my parents. "Sign it," I said. My father picked up the pen, his hand shaking with rage. "You think you've won, don't you?" he spat. "You've destroyed this family." "No, Dad," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "You destroyed this family when you decided your son's wants were more important than your daughter's future. You destroyed it when you gambled with money that wasn't yours." "I'm just an archivist, cleaning up the mess and creating an accurate record of what happened." He signed his name with a vicious slash of ink. My mother followed, her signature a shaky, tear-stained scrawl. When the deed and the rental agreement were also signed, Mr. Hemlock carefully packed the documents away. "My office will file the deed transfer with the county on Monday," he said formally. "Margaret will be the legal owner of this property. The first rent payment is due on the 1st of next month." He nodded to me and saw himself out, leaving the 5 of us in the wreckage of our family. I stood up to leave. Eleanor stood with me. As I walked towards the door, my mother called out. Her voice filled with a desperate, pleading note. "Where are you going, Margaret? This is still your home." I paused at the doorway and looked back at them. The 3 of them looked small and defeated, huddled together in a home that was no longer theirs. "No," I said, the word final. "This is my property, and you are my tenants. That is all we are to each other now." The months that followed were a study in quiet transformation. The 1st of the month arrived, and just as the agreement stipulated, a check for the rent appeared in my mailbox. It was sent in a plain white envelope with no return address, but I recognized my father's precise, angry handwriting. I deposited it without ceremony. It wasn't money, it was an installment payment on my stolen past. Each check was a confirmation that the power had shifted, a quiet acknowledgement of their debt. I never visited the house. My only communication with them was through sterile, formal emails regarding necessary property maintenance, a leaky faucet, a loose shingle on the roof. I would hire a professional, pay the bill, and deduct the amount from their next rent check, sending them a meticulously itemized invoice. I treated them exactly as I would any other tenants, and this cold professionalism seemed to unsettle them more than any screaming match could have. They were no longer my parents, they were a line item in my budget. My mother tried to break through this wall. She would send long, rambling emails filled with nostalgic stories of my childhood, photos of me as a little girl, and pleas to let go of the anger and let the healing begin. I never replied. Her attempts at emotional manipulation were transparent now. She wasn't seeking reconciliation. She was trying to regain her maternal authority, the one tool she had always used to control me. But that tool was useless now. I was immune to it. My real healing was happening far away from them. The book restoration course was a revelation. I discovered I had a talent for the delicate, patient work of mending torn pages and restitching broken bindings. There was a profound symbolism in it that wasn't lost on me. I was taking things that were broken, things that others might have discarded, and making them whole again. My boss was so impressed with my work that he promoted me, putting me in charge of the society's new restoration department. It came with a significant raise, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of true financial security, one that I had built entirely on my own merit. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, explaining that I had been dealing with a difficult family business matter. They didn't press for details, they just welcomed me back. I started dating again. I traveled, taking a weekend trip to the coast just because I could. I was building a life that was rich and full, a life that had no room for their toxicity. My only remaining family tie was to Eleanor. We had Sunday brunch every week. She never brought up my parents or Daniel unless I did. She was more interested in my restoration work, in the new person I was dating, in the life I was building. She was the one who had given me the truth, and in doing so, had given me back my freedom. About a year after the signing, I received a call from Daniel. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in 12 months. He sounded different, quieter, more subdued. "Hey, Mags," he started a little awkwardly. I moved out. I was surprised. "Out of the house? Where did you go?" "I got a small apartment with a roommate on the other side of town," he said. "I sold the car. I used the money for the security deposit and first month's rent. I got a new job, too, in an office. It's just data entry, but it's full-time with benefits." He told me he was taking night classes in audio engineering, paying for them himself. He was tired of pretending to be an artist and had decided to learn a practical trade within the music industry. There was no grand apology, no dramatic plea for forgiveness, but in his words I heard the quiet acknowledgement of his complicity. He was finally growing up, and he knew he had to do it on his own without the cushion of my stolen inheritance. "That's good, Daniel," I said, and I meant it. "I'm happy for you." We talked for a few more minutes, and it was strained, but it was a start. He was no longer my golden child brother, he was just a young man trying to find his way. Maybe in time, we could build something new. A few weeks after that call, my father's final rent check arrived. It paid off the last dollar of the $50,000, plus all the accumulated interest and legal fees. The debt was settled. True to my word, I listed the house for sale. It sold within a month in a hot market. After paying off the remaining mortgage, there was a substantial amount of equity left. I had my lawyer transfer the entire sum to my parents. I didn't want a penny more than what I was owed. It was never about the profit, it was about the principle. I heard through a leaner that they used the money to buy a small condo in a retirement community an hour away. They had finally been forced to downsize, to live within their means. Their reign was over. My victory wasn't loud. There were no fireworks, no public shaming beyond the initial lawsuit. It was a quiet, internal victory. It was the peace I felt in my new apartment, surrounded by books I had restored with my own hands. It was the confidence of knowing I could stand on my own 2 feet, not out of a manufactured necessity, but out of genuine strength. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the record had been corrected, the truth had been preserved, and justice, in its own methodical way, had been served. They had tried to write me out of my own history, but like any good archivist, I had found the original documents and restored the story to its true form.